So now let's go on to Afghanistan. In order to help us do that, we're going to talk to Farah Stockman. She's from Boston Globe. Farah, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you.
So John Kerry's done something interesting over there, and I'm not sure that a lot of people are aware of it. What role did he play in the talks with Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan?
Yeah, he played a pretty unusual role. He landed on Friday thinking he was just coming for a fact-finding visit. He was eating dinner in the cafeteria with some troops from Massachusetts when the U.S. ambassador told him about a political crisis that was brewing and asked for his help. And Kerry ended up driving over to the presidential palace that night, meeting with Karzai for some 20 hours over the next 5 days, kind of talking Karzai out of declaring a political war on the international community. Basically, there's been an election dispute over in Afghanistan for the last 2 months. The government has been paralyzed by the fact that the UN and several U.S. officials believe that Karzai's election victory was badly tainted by fraud, and Karzai was saying, no, I pretty much won fair and square. Maybe there was a little fraud, but I still won. And so Karzai was going to refuse to accept a second round of elections, and Kerry basically convinced him to give in.
So before Kerry gets in there, Hamid Karzai is holding his position of what fraud? What are you talking about? I'm going to keep on being the president here, and I'm going to ignore all these charges. After he comes in, what was the result?
Well, the result was that Karzai said, I still think I won, but I agree to a second round, and I'll beat my rival in the second round. And Kerry's argument to Karzai was, look, it's important that the world see your election as legitimate, and maybe you did win, but let's make sure that everybody believes it.
So let's be clear now. Karzai election was not at all real. I mean, who knows who would have won? There's no way of knowing, right? But how many fake ballots did the UN find?
Well, Karzai got the Afghan Election Commission, which is supposed to be independent, but which is pretty much appointed by Karzai, gave Karzai 54% of the votes, and his closest rival got 28%. But there were so many election irregularities. There were reports of polling stations that didn't even open, where thousands of people were alleged to have voted. So an elections complaint commission, which was backed by the UN, thought that as many as 1 million votes were bogus, which still, you could still say, well, Karzai was still got more votes than other people, but if you don't, under Afghanistan's constitution, if you don't get half the votes, then you have to go for a runoff.
No, but the problem, Farah, is that I don't believe any of it. I mean, look, if you have he theoretically got in the ballpark of 3 million votes, but then we found out 1 million of those were fraudulent. That's a gigantic number, right? Then I don't really believe any of it. I mean, if they fix the election that much, then they could do anything. They could do like the Iranian government did. Yeah, we won huge.
It is a big number, and I was in Afghanistan in June, and even without all the vote fixing, there were a lot of allegations that Karzai, who controls pretty much every ministry there, all his supporters were using government vehicles to campaign, and they just had all he was the incumbent. He has all the access to media. He's the head of a very corrupt country. So I think, but having said that, a lot of Afghans I talked to said, Karzai stinks, but we're still going to vote for him because, he's the only guy we see. The interesting thing now is what happens if his challenger really wins. Maybe enough people have been angry about the vote fixing or the rigging that they might all pile on to the other side. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
All right. Well, I don't believe that there's any chance of that. So if I'm wrong, I need you to disabuse me of that notion, because the Independent Election Commission, they've learned well from our propaganda, is not at all independent. It's appointed by Karzai. The chances of them saying that his opponent won, I would put at 0%.
I think it's going to be tough to conduct an election fairly in the next 2 weeks, but they're saying that they're going to try to do it, and the challenger is spoiling for a fight, and so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I really don't know. Afghanistan is constantly surprises me.
Yeah, well, if his challenger won, that would be quite a surprise. Not if he actually won, but if they declared that he won. I mean, what, Karzai is going to come out and be like, oh, yeah, boy, he got me. Yeah, he won. There's no way that's going to happen. So, but let's talk about realpolitik here. It wasn't that John Kerry is excellent at persuasion, although apparently he did a very, very good job here. But really, the bottom line here was, didn't he essentially say, look, if you don't at least go for a second round, we're out E5000. We're out of here.
I mean, I'm not sure if he used that exact term,
so?
but I think, the Obama administration has made some noises in recent weeks that it matters to them. It's going to be really hard to send American troops to die in Afghanistan and to send a lot more money there, billions more there, if we're just seen as propping up a government that it wasn't legitimate in the first place. And so I think, the whole election and the way it went down and the way Karzai was refusing Karzai thought the fraud allegations were overblown. He didn't deny that fraud had happened, but he basically thought, hey, I still would have won.
Now, can I just pause for a second? I love that it's a third of the votes were fraudulent. Those charges are overblown. Can you imagine Democrats win a national election in the United States? So the audience has a sense of how big this was. But we find out that all of the votes in Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and then some, were completely fraudulent. You think the Republicans would be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. It was a little overblown. Now, of course, it was the shoe was on the other foot, and the Democrats lost. Of course, they'd instantly say, well, for the best of the country, okay, I guess Bush won. But
as crazy as it sounds, it makes me want to look back in U.S. history, because I bet we did have elections back in the day that were super corrupt. I bet we did.
33%?
I'll get back to you on that.
Oh, that's awesome! I'd love for you to get back to me on that. I keep it open.
We now have very high standards for elections, but it hasn't always been that way.
Well, we don't.
Hall, there was, But anyway,
I don't want you to get me wrong. We don't have high standards for elections. We have horrible standards for elections. The guy that was declared president in 2000, in no way, shape, or form, actually won the presidency. So we're not on the moral high ground here as we talk about this. But finally, Farron.
But we have the money, which is why we can tell Karzai that he better accept these results, because he was really facing, being hung out to dry by a lot of Afghans and by the whole world, basically.
No question about it. It's Zamani Lebowski. I know that. So let me ask you one final question. We're talking to Farrah Stockman from the Boston Globe. She wrote about this. You can find that on Boston.com. And Kerry did a great job of diplomacy here. You have to give him a world of credit. Now, having said that, isn't the real problem if Karzai says, okay, let's do the re-election, which he has, right, the second round, and then they just do more fraud there, and they declare themselves the winner, and then, of course, they're not going to back away from that, because that's the final results, and then Obama's stuck. Because if we, unless we say, you know what, we have clear and absolute evidence that it was fraudulent, so then we're leaving. He's put in a situation where if he accepts the results, then he has no reason to leave when we don't actually believe the government is real or something that the Afghan people actually support.
Let's be honest. I don't think Obama wants to walk away from Afghanistan. And I think that would put the U.S. in a really weird position. And they don't want to be in that position. So they don't want to have a government that's seen to be illegitimate. So, yeah, I think it is a problem. How are you going to conduct a fraud-free election 2 weeks from now with many of the same people who conducted the first one? Although today they did say they fired about 200 district election officials who were believed to have either at least been complicit or turned a blind eye. I mean, people have known for a long time that the government of Afghanistan has a really, a dirty side to it. There's a lot of dirty deals going on. between, narco trafficking, hostage taking. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening there, and yet we're still there. And so I think the big thing here was, the fraud just became so widespread they couldn't ignore it, and then they had to do something. And,
I don't want anybody to mistake what I'm saying. I'm a realistic guy. Of course they're dirty, right? It's a matter of how much, but the real question isn't that. It's not like I feel offended by their lack of morality in politics, right? Let alone everything else. The real question is, do the Afghan people support that government? Because if they do, then we can work with them. But if they don't really support that government, then there's no hope of quote-unquote winning in Afghanistan.
And I think you hit on a real key point here, because Afghanistan is hard, in a way it's hardly a country. It's got so many factions and so many different tribal groups, different regions, and I think there is a danger here that you'll just see Afghanistan split further apart with this political crisis, where Karzai is going to be playing to his Pashtun base, which is, by the way, the home of the Taliban, and whereas Abdullah, he's from the north, he's a different tribe, and he'll have different supporters. And so, Karzai was once a really unifying figure, and we're just saying that, however this plays out, he's not that guy anymore.
That certainly seems to be the case. All right, Farah Stockman from Boston Globe. We really appreciate you coming on the Young Turks talking about it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. Young Turks.